It's the MyMichelleLive podcast.
Looking for the God story and news of the day. MyMichelleLive News and Views. Here's Michelle.
Thank you, big voice guy. Welcome to News and Views Thursday. We're talking this week, the entire week, we've been bringing logic and reason into the discussion, which I know isn't really fashionable right now to discuss logic or reason or to logically debate things out. It's more, come on, I don't like what you have to say. I find it offensive. It's wrong. You don't get a voice, and I'm going to label you, and I'm going to cancel you. That's really a lot of what's happening now. So, on a lot of stories, we talked last week a bit about Gina Carano, the Mandalorian star. She and even her toys now are no longer approved for production. I mean, total canceling. You know, let's talk Disney for just a moment. That Disney, who put out movies of strong, independent women with their own thought processes, even if it offended or bothered other people or went above and beyond and around the groupthink or the illogical fallacy of ad populace, whatever's popular, right? Whatever the group actually thinks. So Disney had things like Milan. They had movies like Pocahontas, which isn't really historic, but I mean, you know, historically accurate, but that's a show for another day. Thank you very much. But yet it's okay to cancel this woman for thinking for herself, and even some of the things that she's been accused of saying she never said. She just brought some things to the table. She has a differing point of view, like it or not. Free speech can be uncomfortable. You don't cancel people for it. Another celebrity who is canceled off and on, and he doesn't seem to care, is Chris Pratt. He's known for appearing in the Marvel movies, you know, Guardians of the Galaxy, and he's been canceled. Oh, not only that, but also in Jurassic Park in the latest movies. But he's been canceled plenty of times on Twitter over claims that he is homophobic and goes to an anti-LGBTQ church. Again, no logic and reason, because for people who go to churches like Chris Pratt goes to a church, or they adhere to a traditional marriage structure, they're not saying I hate you or I'm anti-LGBTQ, you know, in your own choice, your world. They're saying this is God's best. This is what we see as being God's best. This is what marriage is. You want to do you. That may be your business, and that may be between you, your partner, and God. But as far as marriage, should we look at marriage as being between a man and a woman? Domestic partnerships in other regards. That's something that can be debated and not canceled. You don't, and if you feel that it's hate, you don't distinguish darkness with darkness. You don't distinguish hate with hate. You distinguish darkness with light. And you distinguish hate with love. Apparently, Dolly Parton, she's being canceled because of her Super Bowl ad where she changed her song from 9 to 5, the old 9 to 5, change it to 5 to 9, talking about what you do after work. That's insensitive to people who have to work a couple of jobs or work late at night. We're wanting to cancel President's Day because not all presidents are good presidents or woke presidents. We're looking at PETA's wanting to cancel Groundhog's Day, which just happened earlier this year. They think maybe put a meteorologist in a hole and make him crawl out because it's insensitive to animals. And by the way, we need to cancel, they say, words like pig out and you're acting like an animal. It hurts animals' feelings. We've taken it really far. We can be offended by everything. And in our offense, we have less logical capabilities to talk to other people and make changes in the world. I have to play this for you. John B. Christ, super funny, can't even go to the supermarket without getting offended.
We got rid of Aunt Jemima, we got rid of Uncle Ben's, but I am wildly triggered by the brands and the photos that I see in this grocery store. Using a polar bear to sell your ice cream, Klondike? Did you know polar bears were extinct? No thank you. Canceled. Paw Patrol mac and cheese. Listen, defund the police, defund Paw Patrol. V8, you know what kind of emissions an engine like that puts out into the environment? I drive a Prius and that is canceled. Canceled. White rice, brown rice. Why they gotta be separated? Think about it. Canceled. Uncle Ben's? Absolutely offended by that. Listen, do I know any minorities myself? No, I don't, but I feel very confident speaking on their behalf on the internet. Hola, Tapatio. Una pregunta. You ever heard of cultural appropriation? Canceled. Oh, look at there. It's a woman leading a cow against its will to the slaughter, selling popsicles shaped as bullets. Wow, absolutely canceled. Blue Ribbon, everyone's a winner. Thank you. That is the only brand of ice cream I will support. Rebel ice cream. Wow, why don't you just change this to Soldier in the Confederate Army ice cream? Okay, I just looked up Red Baron. Red Baron is a fighter pilot in the German Air Force in World War I. Seems extremely anti-Semitic. Orville Redenbacher, look at this guy. He definitely made some mistakes in his past. Do you want to cancel him? We can if we want. I'll look up some mistakes that he made in his past and we can cancel him. I need to appease my white guilt by virtue signaling on the internet.
We have a link on our website, MyMichelleLive.com, to the entirety of John B. Christ's funny experience at the supermarket. Super great. And thank you, John. That was great. Continuing the theme through the week of logic and reason. Have we lost all reason to rhetoric? It seems that in our world, we have kind of abandoned the idea of dialogue, logical discourse, looking for truth, to how does it make me feel? Politicians jump on that bandwagon to manipulate us into getting the support that they need to stay in power and, well, in some cases, complete their agenda. Is that what is happening around us? Can we look logically and argue logically about some of the issues of the day? That's part of what we're taking on this News and Views Thursday. Let's talk, well, for example, guns. If you remember back in Parkland a few years ago, 2018, 17 people, 14 students and 3 staff killed by a gunman on Valentine's Day. Fast forward to 2021, our new president has called on Congress to pass, quote, common sense gun law reforms. Some of those reforms will include required background checks. Does that seem reasonable? Maybe. On all gun sales, a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines, and eliminating immunity for gun manufacturers that knowingly put weapons of war on our streets. So does this seem common sense? Well, we're going to be taking that on and actually talking about it without canceling. I'm not about to cancel my next guest, Edwin Walker. He's a Houston-based attorney for U.S. Law Shield. They're a company that provides legal protection to gun owners. So you come from a side of saying, hey, we have to have a little common sense. Guns are a reality. They're part of our constitutional right. And being a man of the law, you, I'm hoping, argue logic and reason on a daily basis. Welcome.
Well, thank you for having me. I certainly try. And it's interesting that one of the first things you mentioned in your opening dialogue was about, the words that we use and the way that they make us feel and the nomenclature, because that has been one of the primary tools of the anti-gun folks, the anti-Second Amendment folks, is that they use these words and they're unchallenged. They're never called to task. They're never asked to explain. Just a few of the things that they rely on they talk about a gun violence epidemic. There is no gun violence epidemic. There really isn't.
All right, let's stop there just for a moment. Let's just stop there for a moment, because that is something that you can challenge with studies and with facts, with logic and with reason. Okay, it feels like there's a gun violence epidemic when we see things bombarded at us from the news. It scares us. It hurts us. We fear for our children. We feel unsafe. And you hear me saying a lot of feeling words. So how much of that is rhetoric? And then how much, as you say, let's look into the facts. Are there studies that show otherwise, so that we can actually think it through and dialogue rather than just feel bad?
Well, yeah, all you have to do is look at the FBI crime statistics. The things that are high profile, like you mentioned, the Parkland shooting, and anytime there's a mass shooting, of course, it looks like the gun is at fault. Instead of I think that there is a problem with evil in the world, and there is a problem with crazies, and there is a problem with people wanting to do things to get on the news. But if you look at gun violence as a whole, if you look at, armed robberies and, just random murders that are done by a gun, where you have one or two individuals killed by a gun instead of, 14 or 15 or 20, that, of course, is going to make the news. And like I said, you can look at the statistics, and if you look at per capita murders that are committed by firearms, they have steadily gone down over the last 50 years. And so we don't have a gun violence epidemic. And also, one of the things that the anti-gun folks like to throw into this mix are accidents and suicides. And those are not actually acts of gun violence. It's a tragedy anytime somebody loses their life, but somebody killing themselves with a firearm or somebody, having an accident with a firearm is not the same as an innocent life being taken by a firearm, where one person has decided unilaterally to end the life of another person unlawfully with a firearm. And if you look at that statistic, the anti-gun folks throw out this number that, there are 35,000 gun deaths, or there are 40,000 gun deaths in America. Well, if you look at those, only about a third of those are actually criminal acts that are committed with firearms. And so,
and what are the others?
Well, the others are suicides and accidents.
Okay.
And justified shootings.
Okay. And so some people are saying, well, for these suicides and accidents, if we had guns out of the hands of citizens, we wouldn't see suicides that lead to fatalities, or gun accidents that lead to children, shooting their little brothers.
Well, and keep in mind, the laws, whenever we're talking about expanding gun laws, the laws already exist. There are laws in all 50 states which seek to prevent guns from falling into the hands of children. Suicides are tragic, but they are basically isolated events. They're encapsulated into the individual and the family that experiences it. And it's
so
terrible,
we can't blame guns, is what you're saying. But in a way, we aren't doing anything to really turn back some of the illogic around the coronavirus and lockdown. The loss of jobs has made suicides go up, particularly among young people. So you can spin things any way you want and make anything that you want to be the bad guy. But when we get to the point where we're only operating by rhetoric and feelings, Edwin, we're not really debating out what could be best, what really could curb some of the violence that we see or some of the concerns that we have.
A lot of the anti-gun rhetoric from the politicians out there, it is clear that they know nothing about firearms.
You remember in debate class, you had to understand where the other person was coming from so that you could make a logical and powerful argument and debate things out. That is suffering, and because of that, I think we're suffering and even putting ourselves in more danger. I'll give you the final word.
Well, yes, and we see that with the anti-gun agenda that's been rolled out by they virtually know nothing about the gun laws that exist already. They don't know anything about how firearms operate or what makes them more or less deadly. There's nothing that makes one more deadly than the other. It's very concerning that the people who are in charge with passing gun laws know nothing about the laws that already exist or the guns that are out there that they're attempting to regulate.
Yeah. So once again, reason has given way to rhetoric, and we're all suffering for it. We should be having a debate on this. I have really enjoyed our time today. Edwin Walker is down there in a very unseasonably cold Texas in the Houston area. So stay warm, my friend, and please, will you join us again soon?
Well, thank you. It's been my pleasure. And, anytime, always available to speak with you.
Hey, I have news for you men. It's only logical and reasonable to want to look your best when you have that gorgeous beard on your face. So take care of your beard. We have a connection for you with real bearded men. So if you're a real man and you got a real beard, go to Real Bearded Men. Find the link on MyMichelleLive. Save money and make that beard look great. Welcome to News and Views Thursday, where today we're talking about logic and reason. Throughout the week, we've been taking on the idea of logic and reason and being able to take on the issues of the day with a little logic, with a little reason, and coming to logical conclusions. But in some instances, it seems as though we have abandoned logic and reason for rhetoric. So looking at specific issues like immigration, where have we lost the ability to debate and come to logical conclusions, and where are we getting it wrong? So I'm going to someone who has been on the front lines. He's a retired ICE Supervisory Special Agent, Victor Avila. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Michelle, for having me. Thank you so much.
So as we see now 25,000 folks that are going to be coming into our country, we've had a different change, completely night and day in presidential ideas, but we still have the same old debate. You know, we're a caring country. We need to open our borders. Wait a minute, let's take a step back. But we're not able to really discuss these things anymore and find reasonable solutions. How has that affected the border? How has it affected our agents, and how is it affecting our country? Lots of stuff to ask there, huh?
It really is, and it really is a big shift just in the last 3 weeks under the new administration. And you're absolutely right. I've always considered myself as a former law enforcement officer, a person that uses logic and common sense on a daily basis. And it always seems right now that has gone out the window, because one thing is to disagree with policies that the prior administration had implemented regarding border security and immigration. And another thing is to disregard completely the safety and security of our country and our communities. And they don't seem to be happening hand in hand. They're the new policy, the 26, by the way, I hear it's 26,000 people that will be coming in later this week. We are unable to vet them completely. They're asylum seekers. However, the asylum criteria has not changed in this country, and the laws to seek asylum have been the same for many years. It's the interpretation of that asylum laws that has changed. And so we're going to allow these undocumented individuals to come into the country, seek asylum from within, which is the old catch and release policy that is now back in full effect. And over 90% of these individuals will never be heard from again once they get their court hearing sometime in 2 or 3 years from now. And so there's no logic or reasoning behind that, and in regarding our border security. Now, that's immigration. There's the cartels, there's the human trafficking, the human smuggling, the poison that continues to come into our country, the methamphetamine, the fentanyl. We had over 80,000 overdoses last year in this country on that poison that has come to our communities around our country, and there's no outrage there. And so I love that the premise of the show today is because approaching things with what's happening on the ground in a logical sense. And the true experts are our border patrol agents and on the front lines that see it happening every day right now. And let me tell you, it is a crisis down there. It will continue to be because the signal has been sent to Mexico, Central America, and frankly, the rest of the world that the border is wide open. And there's conflicting messages from this administration, the Biden administration, as to how to enforce that, especially when it comes to communication with Mexico, as to how we're going to approach it. There hasn't been a clear, concise message throughout from the administration to the whole Department of Homeland Security as to how to address this. It's kind of like, let's open it up, but wait a minute, let's not open it up because we have people coming in with COVID positive cases, and all of a sudden COVID doesn't matter, but it does matter, and it's just creating more chaos down at our southern border right now.
Yeah, that's something, looking at logic and reason. We have closed our entire country down. People have lost jobs and businesses. We can't go and see grandma when she's in the hospital, or if your wife is having a baby, you can't be part of it. We have essentially built a wall around ourselves. And yet where it comes to our borders, we're saying, oh, but that's okay. Another side issue of that is the vaccine. People are clamoring to get this vaccine, and yet we had a story here, true story, Victor. A granny in her 80s walked something like 6 miles in the snow to get her vaccine, and yet, excuse me, a lot of folks aren't able to get their vaccines, and the administration is saying, well, we'll just vaccinate everyone coming in. So, it would make sense that if you're trying to achieve herd immunity through vaccines, which whether that works or not, subject for a different show, you would think that you would make sure that your herd immunity, your health of your nation is set, then you can more effectively help others. It's the idea of the airplane. Put your mask on first before you put it on someone else.
That's a great analogy. And adding to that is, the travel restrictions. The administration wants to implement travel restrictions into the state of Florida because of what, they're open over there and what the governor has done. Yet there's no restrictions as to coming into our country illegally. It doesn't make any sense. 1 + 1 does not equal 2, and no logic. And really, what really worries me is the safety and security, because other people that want to come into our country, and I'm not talking about the economic migrants. We are humanitarians. We do feel for the circumstances that these people are leaving and from their countries. Yeah. But there comes to a point in our country that in the United States we have to protect our own sovereignty, and we want to help these individuals, but we do have the laws that we have to enforce. Because of our
immigration. I mean, I'm assuming that both you and I have some background that leads us outside of just, born and bred in the United States. My family is Hispanic, Hawaiian, even immigrants from Ireland. So, we all have that. We're better people because of immigration. We're better because of the diversity that brings in. However, we're not doing anyone any favors when we just say we open borders. You had mentioned an issue that's I'm very passionate about, and that's human trafficking. You allow people to just come in undocumented. That kind of means logic. Let's take logic here, that they're not documented. You don't know what's happening to them. You don't know what's going on in their lives. And if they disappear forever into the dark world of sex trafficking, we'll never know.
That's right, Michelle. I'm a subject matter expert in human trafficking. That's what I did most of my investigations on, especially when I was stationed in Mexico. I rescued countless women and children from these horrific situations, and was able to dismantle a lot of organizations that traffic women into the sex slave trade into the United States from Mexico, into Atlanta, New York, Miami, Houston, countless cities around our country. And so that hasn't stopped, by the way. That illegal activity hasn't stopped. The drugs hasn't stopped. And unfortunately, the terrorism aspect of it and the national security that I believe border security is continues to be an issue because we're not able to vet these individuals.
I was hoping, Victor, you could share with us some of the stories from the front lines there with border agents. We're really not hearing those stories in the news. We're not seeing it covered or talked about much in the political realm. It's as though it just doesn't exist. We're giving one narrative, and to me that's pretty illogical. So I thought perhaps you could share with us some of the stories of what's really happening down there.
I'll give you two examples. This has just happened in the last week and a half. A human smuggling group was detected down in the Texas border of 81 individuals. And this is the difference that we see this happening every day. However, these individuals, out of the 81, 20 of them were only from Mexico. All others were other than Mexico. We call OTMs, other than Mexicans. And the issue here is that they were given 200 pounds of methamphetamine amongst them to smuggle as part of the smuggling venture. Now, in my career, I had never seen this. It would have been the coyote, you smuggle the people and it's a human smuggling venture and that's it. And the drug cartels do the drugs. Well, they're combining those two efforts now and using these immigrants to say, okay, you're gonna pay us the $4,000 or $5,000 fee to get you across the border. But on top of that, we're gonna make you cross our drugs as well. So that's happening, that's different and that's new. Another thing that's happening, another example I could give you is people that are illegal aliens that are in custody in our local jails are being released. And because of the new Biden administration of his new prioritization or the priority that he set up of people that cannot be touched or deported, the county jails are calling ICE. And the ICE is saying we cannot deport them because of the new mandate by President Biden. And so they're letting these people out into the street. They're illegal aliens that have been in the jail system for a crime they committed. But on top of that, there was an individual that went through that process and was positive for COVID and was released back into the community. This is what's happening that you are absolutely right, is not being communicated in the mainstream media. And these type of instances are happening every day at our border. And it only does is it affects us eventually in our communities.
So let's look at maybe one of the reasons why we've stopped really thinking and using logical arguments. We've gotten to a place where, well, I just feel like this is right. I know you're using a lot of facts, but I just feel like we really want to help these people. They're disadvantaged. We have the most prosperous nation of the world. We should be doing more. Are we really showing compassion, though, with some of the policies that just elicit open, just come on in? What is that doing to the very people that we think we're helping?
And it's a great point. And it's not really so much about compassion, because the United States has sent billions of dollars to Mexico and Central America. When I served there under the Merida Initiative, we worked and I saw our U.S. tax dollars being implemented in Mexico and Central America with equipment, with training the police force. I did a lot of human trafficking conferences and trainings for those type of investigations. And so it just, for me, unfortunately, that money has not resulted in something that was positive for any of those countries. It's actually gotten worse. And I know, like right now, the Biden administration wants to send $4 billion additional in aid. But the problem here, Michelle, is the corruption in these countries. We know that money is not going to end up, a lot of it, in the hands of the individuals that actually need it. And so we need to assess some of that responsibility back on these governments, back on these governors of these countries, that they need to start taking care of their own people. Now they kind of rely so much on the United States, will take them in, that we're seeing a shift from the prior administration saying, listen, we're going to sanction you if you don't help us detain these individuals down in the southern border of Guatemala and Honduras. and even Mexico, rather than give you money. And I could tell you that throwing money at it is not going to solve the issue at all.
Yeah, it would be nice if we could have dialogue and find some common sense ways where we can help people within their own nation. And here's one of the reasons. If we just open our borders and we help the people that are coming in, that sounds lovely. But there are millions of people who are still living in horrific situations that they want to get out of that aren't getting help. And all that it's accomplished here is that we feel like we're just really loving, wonderful people. And look what we've done because we're just welcoming people in, but we're not really solving problems. How do we solve those problems?
Well, I love that question because in my new book, Agent Under Fire, I go through the second part of that and give real world solutions when it comes to the immigration problem and the cartels and border security. And, I've been hearing this immigration reform statement for so many years under various presidential administrations, and nothing has been done about it. And not just the illegal portion of it, but the legal process. Right now, you have individuals that have waited in line, have paid their fees to become green card holders, and all of a sudden they're put aside for all the illegals that are coming in right now. And that's not fair to them as well. And they're not getting the benefits that they deserve for doing it the right way and the legal way. We still have a legal system that I also do believe is broken and needs to be fixed from, waiting an exorbitant amount of years to get a green card. Another issue is the overstays, the people that come here with visas. Somehow they think that because they came over in a visa that they're fine, but they've overstayed their visa. They're as undocumented as the person that waded the Rio Grande River. And so we have to deal with all these issues. And I address a lot of those in my book because it combines the border security issue with the violence that's happening in Mexico, and their conditions in those countries really dictate how we're gonna move forward. And a lot of it won't happen until we secure our border, because we have to take care of our people that are here first. We have a lot of issues going on with COVID. We have a lot of issues going on with violence around our country, in Chicago, in California, in Maryland, St. Louis, high rates of crime, that a lot of those crimes are related and back to the cartels, and these gangs work for them, pushing their product. So I think we have a lot to address in our own country first. And then by allowing undocumented people just to come in, you will see the ripple effect in our communities, in our schools, our health system. I mean, you'll see the effect happening throughout our cities and our counties. And it's something that has to be addressed now because it's been ignored for many, many years.
Yeah, it's a problem that happens when we abandon logic. Our compassion turns to cruelty. We want to be so compassionate and do the compassionate thing, but we're not thinking things through. We're just doing things in such a feeling manner that we're not really helping. And so we're making the matter worse, compassion to cruelty. Victor, your book, Agent Under Fire, you can really tell that you had a passion, even a love for this country, for our freedoms, and even for the people who crave what we have here. I see all of that come together in your book. I want to talk a little bit about that love that is interwoven through the pages.
Well, I thank you for that description. It's a great description, and I'm a very proud American. But just like you mentioned earlier, it doesn't mean that I ignore my Mexican heritage. I love my Mexican heritage. And my parents are both from there, and they came here the legal way. My parents worked hard to get myself and my sisters through school, and I'm a product of the American dream, and I'm all for that. I'm very pro legal immigration. It's just the illegal part of it is I dealt a lot with the criminal part of the illegal immigration, which affects a lot of people and a lot of victims in this country from illegal aliens. That really is horrific to see. But I tried to put that in my book where there has to be a balance, and there has to be able to, I love what you're saying is that communication between both sides, because we've lost that ability. Either you're far one side or far the other, and we need to come together and have that discussions to be able to resolve a lot of these issues that are, frankly, I think are in dire need of attention.
Well, your book not only interwoven with a lot of love for this country and full of hope, but also logic and reason, which is what we've been talking about this whole week. If we could apply a little logic, a little reason, we get to a better story. We get to a story of hope. And I want to thank you for sharing your hope with us, for writing the book. We have links everywhere, that pretty much everywhere you're listening. AgentUnderFireBook.com is where you can find Victor Avila's book. Thanks for joining us. Look forward to maybe having you on again, please.
I would love to be back, and thank you so much for the opportunity to have me today. Thank you.
I want to share with you something that's changed my life. It's a product, and I used to take it when they paid me to talk about it at the radio station. And when I left my job, I stopped taking the product, right? And everything went south. It's Calitrin. It is a collagen supplement and the best out there. A lot of people take it for weight loss. I mean, people are losing anywhere from 10 to a couple hundred pounds. That's great. But for me, what it did is it helped me sleep. It helped me focus. My hair, skin, and nails were looking spectacular. It is amazing for those who may have arthritis, achy joints, that kind of thing. But man, it really is a fountain of youth in a bottle, and I could feel its effects when I stopped taking it. So I contacted them and said, hey, do you want to be an affiliate? You know, you don't have to sponsor my show. Just give me an opportunity to get the product at a special deal and to share that with my listeners. And that's what we're doing. So go to MyMichelleLive.com, click on the link, and learn more about Calitrin, my favorite product. All right, we're going to take this bad boy to the God story. This podcast today, we're going to look a little bit deeper, because it would seem that when we work with logic and reason, it is reasonable to consider faith in science, in history, in communication, to employ logic and reason. We have given way to feeling and rhetoric. Can we ever return? What is the problem? Why aren't we teaching logic anymore? And how has it affected you? We are taking that on today with a gentleman from a very helpful organization that looks at issues just like this and many more. Answers in Genesis. He's a speaker, writer, and researcher for Answers in Genesis. Bodhi Hodge is our guest. Bodhi, hey, thanks for joining us.
Hey, it's great to be on the show.
Yeah, it's good to talk with you. It's been quite a while, but in this time, maybe we should have talked more, because we need to get back to a little bit of logic and reason. I mean, do you pretty much see in every regard, in everything that we see on the news, what we're hearing from our leaders and politicians, what's happening in everyday America, it is all seems to stem from this breakdown of an adherence to logic and reason.
Oh, that's exactly right. You know, I notice this not just with politics. I see it in education. I see it in science fields. You know, my background is science. I actually have a bachelor's and a master's degree in mechanical engineering, and the job of an engineer is to think through problems logically and try to solve those. And yet, if when I look back at my own education, I was never required to have a logic course. And that kind of surprised me. You know, as I start doing engineering, I'm like, well, why didn't they train me in logic? It actually kind of surprised me, kind of shocked me. But yes, you're right. I do. I see that in politics. I see it in science. I see it wherever I'm at. And I always wondered, why is it that so many people have never been taught logic? I actually decided to look that up. I don't know if you're curious about that little history of why nobody's taught logic anymore.
Because we used to, correct?
We used to, yes. In fact, I had a professor. He was an older professor, well retired, and he came back to kind of help out with a class. And at one stage, he said to me, he said, just think through this logically. And I'm like, well, I'm trying to. And he's like, well, you just did a fallacy. He's like, think back to when you were a kid and you were taught all these logical fallacies. I was like, I was never taught those things. And he's like, you were never taught logic? And he's like, and you're an engineer? And I said, yes. And I thought, okay, well, what happened? Because he was taught it. He had several classes in logic. And that kind of surprised me because I didn't have any. So I went back and I looked, and I realized that across the board, logic courses were pretty much just thrown out of the education system around the year 1950 to around 1960. In fact, if you look up secular-based logic textbooks, like what they would have used in a state school back then, the last ones that were published were really late 50s, early 60s. There just isn't any. Now there's some Christians that have published some, and that's a great thing. And you see a few people using it, but by and large they threw it out.
Does that seem counterculture to admit that in the secular realm, logic books have disappeared, but in the Christian realm, logic books still exist?
They're still about.
That sounds like it goes against the culture.
Counterculture, doesn't it?
Yes, that's what she's trying to say.
Well, here's what it is. When you think about this from, say, a biblical viewpoint, we are made in the image of a logical, all-knowing God. So when he made us to be logical beings, to be able to follow reason and logic. There were times in the Bible where God would speak to someone and say, come, let us reason.
Okay.
There's a reason for that. Now, out in the secular world, if everything ultimately came from nothing, which is essentially what the various models of Big Bang teach. Everything came from nothing. You ultimately evolved from chemicals and that sort of thing. Then what is logic? Logic isn't matter. It's not material. It all of a sudden kind of becomes this whole separate realm, this whole separate concept. And so what happened, though, when you look back in the 1950s, what was happening was an evolutionary worldview, Big Bang, things like that were being taught in earth science class, in history class, in biology and geological sciences and so forth. And then the kids would go over to a logic class and they would see the fallacies within that worldview. So something had to give. So what they ultimately did was threw out logic. They threw out logic. And so all of a sudden, we have entire generations of people who were no longer taught how to think. They were told what to think. And that changes an entire culture. And that's what we're living in today.
Yes, we are indeed. And this is where we're at. We don't have logic. What is it, though? Can we maybe rewind a little bit? Because folks will say, well, I'm trying to think logically. This makes sense to me. Isn't that really what we think logic is? This makes sense to me.
That's right. In fact, all of us use logic every day, whether we realize it or not. We sometimes just don't know the names of it, or we don't always spot the fallacies. But sometimes you can hear an argument and say, well, there's something wrong with that argument. Sometimes we can't name it. See, that's where when you study logic and logical fallacies, you can learn those kinds of things. But really what logic is, it is essentially the tools for correct reason, to be able to think through things, think through arguments. When I say arguments, I don't mean like yelling matches and things like that, but thinking through things, propositions and premises, to arrive at an actual conclusion. So that's what happens with logic. That's the actual definition of it.
All right.
Yeah, here, I've got one of the definitions for it right here, right in front of me.
Excellent.
This comes from Merriam-Webster. They say logic, used strictly in the singular, is the science that deals with the formal principles of reason. And of course, we all want to be logical. We all do that, don't we?
We do. We try. Again, for me, I think the average person would say the very definition to me is that seems reasonable.
That's right. The problem is, and we all fall into this, because we're in a sin-cursed and broken world, sometimes when we think through things, we don't think through it properly. Or sometimes we hear an argument that sounds reasonable because we really haven't thought too deeply about it. And so sometimes we start thinking illogically on certain things, but we don't realize it. I found that most people that commit logical fallacies, for example, they don't realize that they were doing it. You have to point it out, and then sometimes they step back and go, oh, yeah, that is fallacious. I didn't realize that. And, I don't say that to be critical to other people, because I look back in my own life, and I'm like, oh, wow, I was so illogical on this point, As I've grown and learned and studied so much about logic and reasoning, it really has helped me hone in on arguments, be able to say things a little better, and at the same time, it takes the emotion out of it. Sometimes when you're really close to an argument or you really believe something and you're really sure about it, and then when you find out it may not be right, sometimes you still want to believe it anyway. Logic, when you understand that, helps you be able to step back, analyze it, okay, maybe this isn't the best. So it brings a little humbleness into it, I think.
Okay, if you don't mind, help us to see maybe some of the illogical addictions that we have in America, because there are quite a few ways that we're hearing arguments out there. We're even being manipulated, and frankly, it's maddening. I mean, people are being manipulated by illogical fallacies, and we don't even really understand why. Can you give us some examples so it kind of sets the stage so we can understand what is happening and why we're getting away from logic?
Well, they're all over the place. I mean, I hate to put it that way. I actually wrote a whole book on it called Confound the Critics, where I'm using actual examples where people have written to us, and they're just full of logical fallacies. So I go through and I break them down. I show you how to spot these things. But there's one that I just did that got published this week. It's actually making a lot of waves out there because that's what happens when you respond to someone like Snopes. I don't know if you're familiar with Snopes. Snopes is one of those fact-checking websites.
Yes.
And there's times they fact-check that's really good. There's times they fact-check that's not very good. And they decided to have a go at Christianity the other day, basically just ripping into us. And it wasn't actually Snopes as an author. They actually had a guest author that had written it, and they went ahead and just put it on their website and didn't even think twice about it. So they put it up, and I actually did the response to it, and it's out there on the web right now. But, for example, one of the things that was used in that particular article was Haeckel's faked embryo drawings. I don't know if you're familiar with Haeckel's fakes. Haeckel lived in the late 1800s, and he drew up all these little creatures, whether it's a fish, a salamander, a turtle, a chicken. He even put a human in there, basically they're little embryos. And he basically had them all drawn out almost identical, saying we had gill slits and we're just going through these phases of evolution. Well, people were able to spot that was a fake pretty quick, and so people have pointed out that it's a fake. The problem is it's still in textbooks. It's still in museums. I saw it in a museum in Sweden there maybe 15, 20 years ago, with these big banners. Well, it's still there. Well, in this particular article, they acknowledged it was a fake, but then they went on to defend it. And it was the oddest thing, which is exactly opposite of what you would expect from someone from Snopes. You're supposed to check these things out. If they're being fallacious in their argument, you pull that out. And that's exactly what happened in this one. So really what they said was they're going to go ahead and agree with it anyway, so they were being arbitrary and they were actually being fallacious in their argument.
And it's astounding because Snopes has done that on the political level as well, when I think it was AOC who had said that she pointed out the things that happened during the Capitol riots, and yet she wasn't actually in there at the time. And Snopes had reported, well, that's false or mostly false. While she wasn't there, still, it's like, well, if she wasn't there, then how is that mostly false? And so what you're saying is that we've come to a dangerous place in America where, okay, so you can say that, but I still believe this. And I hear that a lot. I hear that with our continued reporting of what's going on with the coronavirus, the efficacy of certain policies that we've put into place, and still, I believe this. Okay, so what do you do? What do you do?
And you know what that is? That's actually when they start diving into an area called arbitrariness. There's three really good ways to refute an argument. One is if they're being arbitrary. Basically, they're just throwing an opinion out there. They're just being relative. Sometimes they just throw conjectures out there. That's just arbitrary. They've never actually offered any proof. That's just basically their opinion. The other way is when you show where they're being inconsistent. That's where logical fallacies come in. They may say one thing and believe another. That's a double standard fallacy. The third way is we call this presuppositional tensions. Basically, the preconditions for their argument don't make sense in light of their own worldview. In other words, they got the rug pulled out from under them. based on their own worldview. But what you just pointed out there is these are just people throwing out their opinions anyway. They're just conjecturing, oh, well, I believe it anyway, and so therefore that's what it's going to be. That's just arbitrary. And as soon as you can spot that they're being arbitrary, you realize they have no weight in their argument at all. There's just none at all. There's been times we've thoroughly refuted somebody's opinion, and they say, well, it's my opinion anyway. That's what I'm going to believe. What it shows is that they're willing to be illogical. They're willing to be irrational. And, sometimes people are like that, as sad as it is.
We see that in the realm of faith, and that's where this is the most important thing, that in our age, religion seems to be diametrically opposed to reason, at least in the public square. But in reality, Jesus preached. As he preached, lives were changed. His disciples went and preached the gospel, and you had people like the Bereans saying, hey, wait, I'm going to question this. God didn't throw lightning down on them. The Bible says, come, let us reason together. When people say, okay, I need to question this. I'm not sure if this is so. God doesn't strike you with lightning. In fact, he encourages it. And that is kind of unique, actually, in religious texts, is it not?
Yeah, it really is. And, we're in a culture today where people redefine words. I mean, boy, we're seeing that all the time. People are redefining male and female and marriage and you name it, they're redefining it. Well, one of the words that's been redefined is the word reason. There's a magazine out there called Reason. It's actually run by skeptics. These are atheists, secular humanists, people who do not believe in God. And they basically redefined the word reason to be this concept of secularism, this religion of secular humanism or atheism. They're calling that reason. But see, this is one where, they really fall into a presuppositional problem. Let me explain that again. Here these guys are. Now, I want people to understand what an atheist is. An atheist is a religious viewpoint out there that says there is no God. They're not saying that there might be a God. That's agnosticism. They're saying there is no God. There's no spiritual God, to be specific, because it's the God of the Bible that is a spiritual God. We see that in John 4:24, for example. But what they're saying is they are atheistic, and atheism is built on what's called materialism. They argue that everything that exists is material. The whole universe, everything is made out of matter and energy. There is no spiritual realm. That's why they try to make this argument there is no God, because there's no spiritual realm. In fact, if you look at their argument carefully, when they say that everything is material, well, now you've got a huge problem. Because guess what? Logic and reason, they're not made out of material.
Well, then there you go. And neither is love.
By their own religion, they can't even make sense of logic and reason. So what they do, they actually end up coming over and borrowing from a biblical worldview, and they oftentimes don't realize that. So that's where we like to point that out and point out the fallacy in that then.
When we look at some of the fallacious arguments that are tossed about, our lack of learning of logic makes us very vulnerable to whatever we're told. And we're seeing a rise in propaganda in America, where you are being told what to think. We're being led into groupthink in a lot of ways. I'm not going to slam each one of those individual messages. I'm just saying that as messages come to us, we're ill-equipped to reason out if these things that we're being told are true or not. And so we essentially become sheeple.
Right. Yeah, that happens all the time. And so often, because we've not been trained in logic, when somebody says something, because we can't really spot what's wrong with it, sometimes we just adopt it and we believe it. We have to be very careful about that. In the Bible, it actually says, the first to present his case seems right until another comes and examines him. And so often we don't take that second step where we go in and examine, is this really right? Is this really the right argument? Is this really the case? And propaganda is a great one. Propaganda exploded in World War II. The Nazis were famous for their propaganda, but they weren't the only ones. A lot of people started to buy into it. Advertisement is some of the the biggest forms of propaganda. Get this while it's hot, or get the latest gadget, the latest technology. I mean, we sometimes all like, oh, I better go get this. That's a propaganda type. There's no logical reason for it.
And we had that during World War II, didn't we? If you buy this, you're being patriotic. Do the, and it's just, it's a manipulatory practice, and we're seeing it today. I'd like to, as we wind up our time together, look at some of the logic that really is presented in the Bible. I don't think people really realize just how logical the Bible is, and how greatly the Bible esteems logic and reason.
Yeah. Oh, boy, I absolutely love it. In fact, the Bible is the foundation for reason, because we're made in the image of a logical God. So I absolutely love that kind of a subject. I'm more than happy to dive into some of that. When you look at the scriptures, I love that one verse where it says, "Come, let us reason." And I don't know if people realize the context of that. I'm going to pull that verse up here real quick. This is in Isaiah chapter 1, verse 18. And this is the Lord speaking. "Come now, and let us reason together, says the Lord. Though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be white as snow. Though they are red like crimson, they shall be as wool." Now, contextually, I mean, this is a prophecy 700 years before Christ. And here's what the Lord is doing. The Lord knows all things, so his reason is always right. And so when he's sitting here telling Isaiah, hey, come, let us reason together, although our sins are like scarlet, they're red, it's like they're bloody, they shall be white as snow in one sense. And that's prophesying about Jesus Christ, who steps into history and dies on the cross, takes our sin upon himself so that we can be forgiven of our sins. Now, if you think about this logically, the punishment from an infinite God is an infinite punishment. There is no way we as a human being could take that punishment from an infinite God. But Jesus Christ, the Son of God, who is infinite, he could take that punishment. So when Jesus dies on the cross, the infinite Son takes the infinite punishment from the infinite Father, and that's enough to satisfy God's wrath upon sin. That's what makes salvation possible. So here we're looking at a prophecy all the way back in the book of Isaiah, about 700 years before Jesus, and it fits beautifully as you look and see the scriptures unfold later on.
It's amazing that you can see the logic in creation. You can see the intelligent design, but beyond just the intelligent design, the logic, the reason, the purpose, and not just intelligent, but purposeful. You can look at just one area of creation, and I would say our water circulatory system. The same water that people have been drinking and bathing in and washing in the times of biblical times that you were just mentioning is the same water we're using today. That recycling and the cleansing as it goes through the earth, as it filters through, the experiencing the miracles of water. I can't even touch on the depths of it in the length of this program. But there are other things that you see, a logic, reason, and a purpose in creation. What's your favorite example?
Oh, there's so many. Right there in Genesis chapter 1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and the earth was without form and void, and the Lord was hovering over the face of the waters, or over that deep. There's the water right there. But notice what else we have there. We have time. In the beginning, time is triune. If you think about it, it's past, present, and future, where the absolute present is where the past and the future all come together in one point. God created the heavens and the earth. That's the space-time continuum. So, we have space, which is, triune, essentially, length, width, and height. We see water. We also see God say, let there be light. Light is actually triune. It's got an electrical element to it, a magnetic element to it, and it's got the velocity. Water. Oh, water is so incredible. If you just think of the triple point of water, it's a solid liquid and a gas at the same time. It's incredible at a particular pressure and temperature. There's so much I could do just right there looking at that. But here's the one that I love. You move farther down in there. God creates, the land. He creates the sun, moon, and the stars. It's that easy because he's an all-powerful God. It's that easy. He makes animals. He makes flying creatures and sea creatures. He makes land creatures, but then he makes man. And when he makes man, they're unique. They're made in the image of God. Now, if we just think about this, we're not God, no, not by any means, but we're made in the image of God. We're made in the image of a ruling God. He logically gave us something to rule over. He gave us dominion over the earth. When he made us in the image of a logical God, which is why we can do logic and reason and have this conversation right here. It's just there's so many little beautiful aspects to that with regards to logic, with regards to reason. And I love looking at Genesis because it is the foundation of every major doctrine, theologically, directly or indirectly, that is, all the way back there in Genesis 1 to 11. It really is foundational to so many aspects of our Christian faith. Let me just give you an example. This is one that I love. Clothing. You're probably wearing clothes right now. I'm wearing clothes right now. But most of our listeners probably are. If not, I hope you get out of the shower here anytime. But most of the time when we run around, we wear clothes. Well, why is that? Why do we wear clothes? Let's think about this from a secular viewpoint. If we just evolved from animals that go all the way back to a single-celled organism, why do we wear clothes? If somebody says, well, it's cold out, well, then when it's warm, do you not wear clothes? Well, of course, we still wear clothes. See, when we look at clothing, originally, when there was no sin in the world and everything was perfect, Deuteronomy 32:4 says every work of God is perfect. Genesis 1:31 says that everything was very good originally. It really was perfect. Nobody wore clothes. Adam and Eve were naked and they were without shame. It's because of sin that now we wanted to cover ourselves. When Adam and Eve sinned against God, they grabbed fig leaves and they tried to cover themselves real quick. And that was not very logical because if you've ever felt a fig leaf that's like itchweed, it causes a horrible rash. It was terribly illogical for them to want to grab that. What the Lord did is he sacrificed animals to cover that sin. And as a result, we all wear clothing even to this day. It's the foundation for the doctrine of clothing. See, the Bible logically gives us reasons for these types of things, and sometimes we don't think through those very basic ones. Why is there a 7-day week? God created everything in 6 days and rested on the seventh as a basis for our work week. There's so many little things like that.
Yeah. So last question brings us back to the world we live in, the rhetoric and feelings that drive us, and if there is hope that we can get back to a little logic, reason, and faith. How do we do that?
Oh, you know what? I mean, the first thing we need to do is start training the next generation. I remember, I'm a World War II buff. I like to read about a lot of that and what all happened. It's a fascinating war. But one of the things that Hitler did prior to World War II is he said, if he could train one generation, he could turn them into exactly what he wanted them to be. And you know what?
Welcome to America now.
There is a little bit of truth to that. Yeah, there's a little truth to that. What we need to do, though, is start training them in the correct things. And if we could train the next generation how to do logic, how to do reasoning, get them back into things like logic courses, you'd be surprised what that would do. I'm involved in a little school here called 12 Stones Christian Academy where we reintroduce logic classes at a grade school level and a high school level. And the kids said it was their favorite class. And here's why. They actually said this to me, and I repeat this all the time now, but they said, this is the first time someone's taught us how to think.
Instead of what to think. And that's what we're doing in our schools right now. We're teaching kids what to think. and we've even gone beyond that, beyond, I think, Bodhi, the facts and figures of what to think to what to feel. And that to me is even more dangerous than teaching people what to think, because we've just gotten the whole thinking process out of it altogether. So,
and it's all based on feelings.
Wow. What's interesting about what you said, though, What is really interesting is that you're a man of faith. You were talking Bible stuff. I like that. We get to the God story on this program. But what I didn't hear you say that we need to do for the next generation is indoctrinate them in the Word and to make sure that everybody learns the Bible. You started with, and not to say that you don't think everyone could really use that. What you said was very important. We need to get back to teaching logic and reason. And I think there's a logical and reasonable explanation for why you went down that route. Because when we teach logic and reason, it stands to reason that we're going to come to a logical, correct answer. And that seems to always bring us to the God story, inevitably.
That's right. It always brings us back to God's Word. You see, when it comes to logic and reason, they're intricately connected with the Word of God. And that's why it's so powerful. And I think that's one of the reasons when they were throwing out the Bible and throwing out prayer out of the public school system, back in the 1960s, they threw out logic with it because it's all part and parcel of the same. We need to get back to God's Word. That's exactly right. We need to get back to logical and reasonable thinking. When we look at the world, we need to think in terms of what God's Word says, because God is always right when it comes to logical issues.
That's very, very powerful. And I think that's something that we need to wrap our brains around. Not everybody who listens to this program is listening because they believe in the God story. They're just interested in that deeper story. Excuse me. So I guess what I'm going to ask of you as you're listening is to think about that. If in the faith realm we say, hey, let's get back to logic and reason, but in the secular realm, in the world that we live in, we have thrown logic and reason, rationality has even gone at this point, and we are governed by how we feel. There is a problem there. And it's worth really digging into. What is it about the God story that always leads us to a logical and reasonable conclusion? Boom. There you go. Drop the mic. Bodhi Hodge, I want to give you the last word.
Hey, I just want to say thank you. And, I know there's a lot of people out there listening that may not be believers. They may not follow the Bible. In fact, they may have been influenced by the secular world. Hey, I want to encourage you, because there were times in my past that I struggled with many of those same things. But here's what I want you to realize. When it comes down to just about every argument, it's going to be an authority issue. You're either going to have to trust what God has to say on the subject, or if by default you'd reject God, by default you're going to be standing on what man has to say. So that's really what it comes down to, trusting man or trusting God. And I want to encourage you, if you've been influenced by man and man's religions, whether it's secularism, evolutionism, humanism, whatever it might be, I want to encourage you to challenge it, to actually look it up. Think about these things logically, compare these kinds of accounts, one origin's account versus the other, because it will change your life when you realize that God and His Word is true. And so, I would love to just be able to say a little prayer for you when I hop off the phone, to get back to God and His Word and see the power of the Holy Spirit moving in your life.
That's right. You can reach us here at MyMichelleLive.com. We will always talk the God story with you. It is a beautiful story, and this is a beautiful conclusion. Bodhi Hodge is not only a speaker, writer, and researcher for Answers in Genesis, he's also one of the most endearing people like ever. I mean, you're just so wonderful. You're such a nice guy to talk to.
God bless you.
Well, glad you could reason things out with me. If anything I said today doesn't sound logical or reasonable, you can find me at MyMichelleLive. Hey, let's talk about it. Let's reason together. Let's have a logical discourse. What do you say? Do you think it's possible in this day and age? Can it start with you and I? If you liked what you heard today, we're in our infancy, really. I mean, we've been doing this show for a long time, but we're in our infancy in the electronic podcasting era. So like us. Share us. Just one little simple copy and paste the URL and say, hey, give a listen to this. What do you think? And share the God story. Find the God story along with us. Let's look together. I'm Michelle Mendoza. We'll catch you next time.
More news and views at MyMichelleLive.com.